And we are on. We're live. Greetings, good evening, everybody. We're just kind of getting situated here. We'll give it a moment to let a few people come on. We've already got people joining us. Tonight we have another wonderful guest, as we've had from folks from around Cincinnati, from different parts of town, different neighborhoods, involved in politics, civil life, and all types of things in between business as well. As a matter of fact, I've got my Westwood shirt on tonight in honor of Westwood, the best hood, Cincinnati's largest neighborhood, with Evie here. Actually, I'm wearing it out because I had Matt Woods on the other day, another another Westwoodian, but I got to wear my shirt in honor. So, with that being said, John Evie, Westwood resident, lifelong Cincinnatian, and general man about town. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Oh, Derek, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad I could fill in at the last minute.
Yeah, it was last minute, but you were somebody that I wanted to reach out to, and certainly we're going to have some other great guests on going forward. We've had a number already, and I think people really appreciate this, especially during these times when we're kind of in our homes, and a lot of people are on social media and such. But one of the things that we've wanted to do with this, with the program, is not only have interesting folks on from around Cincinnati, but also learn more about them. We see people today, who they are out in the community, but perhaps we don't know the whole backstory, and I think that's very instructive a lot of times for how we came to be where we're at. So with all that being said, if anybody has any questions as we go, I'll keep an eye on the comments. Please feel free to drop those in the comments. Please feel free to share this as well, so more people can spread the love. So John, thank you and welcome, and we look forward to hearing more of your story this evening.
Great, I'm ready. What would you like to know?
Let's start at the beginning.
My life's an open book.
Well, first of all, let's start with this. Cheers! It's always nice to have when usually in an EV setting, there's going to be a cocktail or a beer involved. So,
amen, brother.
And I like your Westwood brewing. We're going to stay on brand with your Westwood mug. But tell us about I know you're a lifelong Cincinnatian. Tell us a little bit about your family, how you got here, and that kind of background. Your family has been here since the beginning of time, or what?
We've been in America for quite a while. So my brother and I did a little genealogy experiment or discovery a couple years ago. And he actually went to Lancaster, Pennsylvania to kind of dive into this history, because that's where we originate from. But going further back, I always like to tell people that we got kicked out of some of the best countries in Europe. So
and some of the best bars in Cincinnati as well.
Exactly. So my family's Anabaptist, or started out as Anabaptist, and they were politely asked to leave Switzerland, and they were transported to Germany, and things were going along pretty well. And then Frederick the Great said, "That's enough. You guys got to go to Ireland." And they got to Ireland. The Irish kicked them out right away. And so the entire Eby clan came from Ireland to America and settled in Pennsylvania, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And so as it turns out, my great whatever grandfather was the bishop for the Mennonite church, and started this church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They were dairy farmers. I'm proud to say that we fought in the Revolutionary War, and the Ebys fought in the Revolutionary War, and they actually got a letter from George Washington that said, "Please quit putting ground glass into the milk that you're sending over to the British," kinds of things. And so they were rabble rousers. But at some point or another, my grandfather, God bless him, Benjamin Franklin, worked for the Pennsylvania Cork Company, and they transferred him to Cincinnati. But the story goes that he married one of someone from the Hershey clan, so Hershey chocolate and what have you. And they ended up splitting up, and so he was rushed off to Cincinnati, and somewhere in between there and Pennsylvania, he became Catholic. And they ended up settling in Price Hill. And my family originates from Price Hill, and I now live in Westwood.
What year might that have been that the Eebies made their grand entrance into the wonderful neighborhood of Price Hill?
So that was in the 1800s, so the 1890s.
Oh wow.
And my grandfather, Frank, God bless him, he was a character. He was a character. He died when I was 3, so I do not remember him. But the stories that my brothers and my parents who have passed have told me are just, it's amazing. I don't know how. Well, never mind. I'll just leave that be. But he was a character. He was a character,
Okay.
and
Well, it runs in the family, clearly.
absolutely, absolutely, Dad was a character, man. I'll tell you. But we grew up in Price Hill, and my parents attended Holy Family Church and school. Grew up on Hawthorne Avenue, and not far from Derek, from some of the places that you own in Price Hill right now. And I'm glad to see that area of Price Hill is making a comeback. Right now, it's exciting, man. It's an exciting time to be in Cincinnati.
No, it is, and I actually, because this is a low budget operation here, I'd actually forgotten. I like to put our name labels up there so people know who we are in. So I'm actually doing that as we speak. So apologize, everybody. It's a low budget operation here, so our production quality will lag from time to time. But now,
That'll happen to your intern.
I need some, I need something. Somebody to keep. Where's Josie at? She's supposed to be on top of this, the cat. At any rate, people know who we are now. But anyway, so growing up in Price Hill, let's talk a little bit about that. And at some point, you meet the wonderful Sue Fry, EB. And of course now your daughters might be eclipsing you in your
Oh,
local fame here in Cincinnati as well. They're big rock stars out and about.
yeah.
And my neighbor now down in over the Rhine,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact.
I'll tell you, when I grew up, my father had always talked about this progression that you would start in Holy Family or St. Lawrence, and then as as your family grew and as your wealth grew a little bit, you moved to St. William's Parish, which was on the border between Price Hill and Green Township and Delhi, right? And then you moved to Westwood because that's where all the doctors and lawyers lived, at that time. And then you died, essentially. But
That was the progression.
yeah, but it was funny, growing up in Price Hill in the '60s and the '70s was a turbulent time. And then I went to school, high school, from '76 to '80. So that was just before integration happened in Cincinnati. So when I was politely asked to leave Elder and went to West High, West High was, just at that point was just making that integration changes, or they were kind of in the throes of it, and it was not going well. And Price Hill, when I grew up there, was probably 95% white people, and everyone that was in my class during grade school at St. William was all white. And I'll tell you right now that when I ran for council, one of the pictures I would carry around with me was my graduation picture from grade school, which had, I don't know, we had 120 kids in our class, so 60 boys, 60 girls. And at that time, this was 2005, there were only 3 of us left living in the city of Cincinnati at that time.
Wow.
So between 1980 and 2005, we lost 90-something% of my class. Boom, out, Green Township.
Right. And I think that, and we'll touch on that as we go along here, because coming up into the present day, I want to talk about, the efforts, and really, one of the things I like to do is just be very real and authentic about it. And let's, especially when it comes to issues of race, obviously it's a sensitive topic and sometimes people skirt around it, but I think, we just need to be honest and face this and look back and say, what were mistakes that we made, what can we do better, what's instructive for the future. So this has been a great challenge, I think, in many cities across the country, and dealing with some of the abject racism and these types of things, and it manifests as well in many different ways. But along with that, we've seen, especially in this, I think maybe kind of brings it up a little bit to today, or when you move to Westwood, and then the whole community organizing aspect there, and neighborhood building and those types of things, where the west side of Cincinnati suffered greatly from the 2008 crash. And now, before we came on here, we were even talking a little bit about, what this is going to look like coming out of this. Are we going to see mass foreclosures again with our current economic situation? What are the impacts on the neighbor, not only individuals and small businesses who are suffering now, but what's kind of the domino effect of that to housing and to our neighborhoods? And it's taken so long and so much work by so many to, just recently to start after it's all, going on 12, 13, 14 years to recover from the great, the foreclosure crisis. And we have these predatory outside real estate interests, buying up houses and foreclosures, and it brings down everybody else's properties that's been there for many, many years. How did that kind of transition for you in your time? When did you move to Westwood from Price Hill, and then what did you see coming out of that, and what were some of the steps that you took and others that began organizing, Westwood Works and some of the other things, and kind of vis-a-vis, the some of the toxic things that were going on with the community councils at that time?
So just to back up a little bit, Sue Fry and I met, my wife Susan and I met in high school. We actually met our senior year. It just took us another 13 years to figure out we should get married, right? And there was some stuff that happened in between. But if you're not familiar with this, if you're a West Sider, you're not allowed to move outside of a 5-mile radius from where your parents are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when my parents were alive and Sue's parents, are still alive, or Sue's mother's still alive, we live inside that 5-mile radius. And, my father's dream was for us to move to Westwood, and I always liked the housing stock here, and Sue happened to live here, and she knew all the streets. So when we got married, decided to raise a family, we were looking for two things. We were looking for great housing stock, and we were looking for a place that was going to provide for us the diversity that we wanted our family to have, that we missed out on when we were kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the reasons we chose Westwood, because it is one of the city's most diverse neighborhoods, but I will preface it by saying this: it is also one of the city's most segregated neighborhoods, and we can touch on that in a bit. So we purchased our house 27 years ago, and we got it for a really good price, and this was going to be our 5-year home, and then we were going to look for a bigger place to raise our kids. But, one of the things we discovered was that when we moved onto our street, that we had just these fantastic neighbors. And, that's one of the things you'll discover about living in Cincinnati, is that when you live on I live on a tree-lined street in a neighborhood that has trees everywhere, that has great neighbors, great schools, great churches. I mean, I don't want to call it the Shangri-La of the West Side, but it was really nice. I mean, we just could not move. Once we started having children and people started having children around us, we live on a cul-de-sac, so our kids could ride their bikes. Their friends were next door. We knew everybody. It was hard to move. We're still here today because we love our neighbors and we love our neighborhood. Westwood's a great place to live, but there's been challenges all along the way. But we've been very fortunate in that people like Frank Eversole and Rick Pouillet have invested heavily in flipping some of the homes in Westwood. And these two gentlemen, EP Investments, just did a great job of taking on these problem homes. They would build them up, and then they would sell them for prices that would just make other people's heads swim. They'd be like, "Oh my God, it's the West Side. You can't sell it for that. Nobody's going to buy it." Boom, they were gone. And I believe actually that people like that in Westwood, who have invested in Westwood in the housing like that and flipping those homes and doing great jobs, and even yourself in Price Hill. I mean, you see how that works, right? People find a great house, they find a great neighborhood. It's exactly what they're looking for. They're willing to pay for that because they know if this house was sitting over in Hyde Park, it'd be worth 2 to 3 times that price.
Right, and if I could just jump in right there, just talk about that from the real estate perspective, and again, we'll see what what happens with this. But on the one hand, we say, well, we want housing to be affordable, but on the other hand, if I've lived in my house all my life, and it used to be worth, 5 or 10 years ago, it was worth $100,000, and now it's worth $60,000, and I owe $75,000 yet on the mortgage for whatever reason, whatever the numbers are, but you get my drift here. If my gutter's falling off or I need a new roof, I can't get a home equity loan to pay for that. If I'm retired, how do I do it? I'm on a fixed income. And so we've been in this scenario on the west side of Cincinnati where, when we talk about housing prices are come up, you're talking from a very low base. I mean, you're not talking off $300,000-400,000 here. We're talking for a long time, houses are worth almost zero. And so when I first invested in Price Hill in 2014, 2015, and people told me I was crazy, just like they told me I was crazy for buying an over the Rhine in 2010. Now everybody thought it was a magic, but it wasn't that way a decade ago. I'm standing on the incline, looking at Old View Park, looking downtown. I could see it. I could almost hit it with a rock. And I turn around and there's houses worth almost like literally $0. They're just vacant and the weeds and boarded up and drug activity and all of this terrible stuff. That's not a good place for any city to find its neighborhoods in, where the housing stock is so affordable it's worth zero and it's not livable. And so there needs to be a balance, but at the same time, this is what we were faced with on the west side of Cincinnati, and not just one home, but thousands, thousands. And it brought neighborhoods down, and people that have lived there all their lives are suffering, because most Americans have, if they're homeowners, that's most of their assets and their family wealth. There's nothing even to pass on. I mean, am I off on base with that?
So maybe not, but I see it a little bit differently living in Westwood. The homes that are the most challenged are also the ones that also have the most opportunity, right? And we've been very fortunate that we've had several good contractors, developers, if you will, who have purchased those homes, like EP Investments and yourself and Price Hill and Bill Burwinkle and others, who have made that investment. And I think as Westwood has, I'll just speak from a Westwood perspective, as Westwood has started to turn itself around politically, in other words, we've been cooperating and working and collaborating with the city council, with the administration, with economic development, DOT, all of those folks, instead of running roughshod over them, right? They're willing to work with us. And people like the Port Authority have come to the table and have said, hey, here's some areas of Westwood we think we can help you with. And so those kinds of relationships and the cooperation that comes along with that, right, can really help a neighborhood. And I would say, Derek, that Westwood is 10% of the city's population. It's 6 square miles. It's ginormous. And we definitely have our challenges. We are seeing some of the stuff that you're talking about. My fear is we're going to see more of it in the future. But I think this is where the relationships that we have with city council and that we have with developers in our community and those that want to come to our community, there's some opportunities there. And we need to have a sane housing policy. I think from a city council perspective, I think that we need to have the right incentives for neighborhoods, so that developers, instead of doing lot splits in Oakley and Hyde Park,
right,
can look at those things in Price Hill and in Westwood and say, oh my gosh, here's 10 houses on the street, 5 of them need to be rehabbed, or 5 of them need to be torn down and rebuilt. Gosh, let's use that incentive where it really makes sense right in this neighborhood, so we can do some infill housing. Those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for from city council and from the administration. Can we make those work? Because they're definitely working in Hyde Park. They're definitely working in Mount Lookout. I mean, that's it's the thing we see every day at the Planning Commission.
Well, that's and so you've been on Planning Commission for quite some time, and so you're seeing this stuff on a daily basis, and I think that's a great point that you bring out. We have seen that, and it takes a while. Sometimes the perception lags the reality, right? And we've seen that
Right.
on the west side, and we've seen folks that, you know what, I can't afford these three and $400,000, $500,000 houses, whatever they may be, you know, in Oakley or Hyde Park or Mount Lookout. And so I see this tremendous value in neighborhoods that are, you know, so close. If I work downtown, and folks that may not have considered the west side before are now. And a lot of changing that perception has to do with the community building. And we see, you know, people today like Nikki Galea, who moved to East Price Hill and has gotten super engaged in the community and on, you know, on the community council there now. I just use her as one example, and just kind of building this positivity. But that energy wasn't always like that, particularly in Westwood. And so let's touch on that. You know, I kind of got introduced to, I don't remember exactly how we first met, but I know our mutual friend Mike Morosky introduced me to a lot of folks in Westwood and kind of made some of those network connections for us. And I kind of, you know, really looked at what you all were doing, and it just seemed so powerful from the neighborhood perspective, and the kind of watching that grow. Kind of walk us through some of those times and what led to that, you know, what some of the takeaways and the learning lessons are, because I use, when in my travels around the city, I use Westwood as an example of the folks, the community, and neighbors really getting engaged and working together for these positive outcomes for the neighborhood.
So to kind of tell that story, I'm going to need to step into the Wayback Machine to the 6th grade, and at St. William's, and so hang on for the story. But I happened to be sitting in the back of the class, and I had this 90-year-old nun. Her name was Sister Rose Emanuel. She was probably 4 feet tall, 90 pounds wet, with her habit on. And I just happened to shoot my friend in the front row with a spitball, right? And she turned around and saw that.
Doesn't sound like you at all.
Oh no! And she saw it, and she was like, "Mr. Eby, see me after class."
Oh.
And for most kids, that would be no big deal, right? You go up after class, sister. You know, you do the whatever it is. You pray on the rosary. You have your penance, and off you go. But my mother was the school secretary, right? So she would take me down to my mom, and she'd say, "Mrs. Eby, do you mind if I take John out and we have a little session of picking up trash around the schoolyard?" And she gave me this stick with a nail on the end and a burlap sack, and she would follow me around the schoolyard and make me pick up trash. And she'd pray on her rosary, and she'd say, "John, always remember this: service to God through service to others," right? And so that was my start in community development or community organizing. And then she would volunteer me to the Price Hill Civic Club, like when they had these events, right? And so here I was, a 6th grader, going to these meetings, these Price Hill Civic Association meetings, and the you know, I'm sitting around my friends' dads and moms, you know, and they're volunteering me for all of these events that they have going. So I kind of grew up around it. My parents were very active. My father served in World War II and in the Army Air Corps. He never flew again. But he was also very involved in the Catholic War Vets and, you know, in Holy Family Gym Club and in the food pantry, as was my mother. So we were always brought up to give back, right? And my mom and my dad could talk to anybody. I mean, I did just walk into a room, and it was amazing, you know, and that all rubbed off on me and all of my brothers. So as I grew older and got involved in more things, and I've been dying to show you this forever. So when I was in high school, I was part of the St. William's Youth Group, and I was their president, and then went on to be the Archdiocesan president for the Catholic Youth Organizations. And I won this award. I don't know if you can see this.
I can't see it.
Outstanding
Catholic
boy of the year. Outstanding.
7980.
I've been dying to show you that for a while. But at any rate,
and by the way, everybody, if you didn't read that, that was 1979 to 1980, not 1879 to 18. Just to be clear.
It might be that old. But, you know, that experience really kind of exposed me. Those experiences really kind of exposed me to the importance of relationships and building those relationships. So when Sue and I were thinking about getting married, this was in the 90s. We got married, and I went back to college. I went 7 years engineering night school. When I got out, I was dying to get back into this community work, right? So I started working in Westwood, but I also started reading the works of John McKnight and Peter Block, all the asset-based community development stuff they were doing. And it just intrigued the heck out of me because it just so reminded me of the stuff that we were doing in CYO and in youth group and in, you know, the things that we had done in high school and college. And I saw how well that worked. And I knew that Westwood was not just famous for saying no, we were infamous for saying, are we allowed to cuss on this thing, by the way?
Oh, hey, there's no FCC here.
All right. So Westwood wouldn't just say no, they'd say fuck no. And it wasn't polite, and nobody wanted to work with Westwood. Nobody, the city administration, the council, the mayor, nobody. They hated us. And so there was no love coming to Westwood. And it finally came to a head over, of all things, an Artworks mural. A young lady had approached the community council and said, hey, I want to have this Artworks mural in Westwood. What do you guys think? I got to have a letter of support from the community council. And they told her no. And they were not polite about it. And they basically said, we don't think that our tax dollars should be used for public art. Okay. So she was dismayed, but not disheartened. She went back a year later and said, hey, I brought with me the folks from Artworks. They're going to give a presentation on what this means to have this mural. And again, she was told no, that we shouldn't be spending public dollars on artwork. So finally somebody said, hey, you should call this guy. His name's John Eby, and talk to him. And so she called. We sat down over, go believe it or not, a couple of beers. And she showed me the application. And sure enough, on the last item on the checklist was you needed a letter of support from the community council or a group of committed citizens. So I told her, go find out how many's in a group. She came back and said, that's 7. And that's how Westwood Works got formed. Wow. We found 7 people, or 10 people actually. We met at a friend's house, Rick Boyd and Kathy Bach, and the local librarians. We met in their house, and with a case of Bud Light and a case of White Castles and a lawyer, we put together all the paperwork for Westwood Works just to put this mural up, right? And we had such a good experience with it that we all just kind of stayed together, this core group of people. And from that, we had such a good time of doing these things that we thought, well, let's investigate this asset-based community development stuff. It's different enough. And we just knew that we needed to change the attitude that people had about Westwood and the perception they had about us. So taking some.
And what year would that have been?
That was 2009.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So in 2010, we got our mural. We had our first Westwood Works meeting at, believe it or not, we had to go to Cheviot because there was nowhere in our business district to eat. That's how bad it was. And so we had our first meeting at Maury's Tiny Cove. There were 12 people. We had a blast. Word got out. Next thing I know, we were having meetings with 40 and 50 people. We had to move venues just because we had so many people who were come because, the meetings were all about doing good stuff. And what I would try to leave people with is that you don't need anybody's permission to do good things in the neighborhood, right? You don't have to belong to a community council. You don't have to belong to a development corporation. Do good. If you have a good idea, go try it out. If somebody says, hey, you're stepping on our toes, say, well, I'm sorry, you can join us next time, but do good in the neighborhood. That's what's really important. And so from that, this core group of people then really started to hone in on what is important, and it's those relationships within the neighborhood that are important. And in asset-based community development, it's all about connecting people, places, and organizations and associations, right? And if you can do that, what you'll discover is that people will gravitate toward those ideas and they'll enhance them, right? So why did we have these fun events? Because it brought people together. I mean, if you're from Westwood, one of the things you'll figure out right away is that on Harrison Avenue, there's probably 5 different churches within a stone's throw of one another, but none of their congregants know one another, right? That speaks volumes about what's happening across our nation, right? We drop into these silos, and this is who we are, and we're never going to get outside of that. But if you bring them together around food and music and drinks and other things, those people start to mix and mingle, and then they figure out, oh my God, we live on the same street. And so that really helped develop some of the positivity or the positive feelings in Westwood. So our core mission has always been to bring to the forefront the positive and possible. And when this became really important is when Kevin Wright started doing his work,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And we met with him, and he said, you know, Westwood has this perception problem. What you need to do is just tell a different story, tell a different narrative. So if somebody publishes a story that's negative, you call the author of that story and you say, hey, here's what's really going on in Westwood, right? And so that's what we've been doing for the last 10 years. And you know, if you're a politician, you're coming to Westwood and you're trying to help out. Chris Seelbach's a perfect example, right? Chris would come and he'd bend over backwards to help Westwood, and they would just say thank you and then run him over, like, you know, and back the bus up and run him over again. And so we finally just decided, gosh, if these people are helping us out, we're going to help them out, right? And so we made it a point to say thank you to people who are coming. And once that began to build that trust among politicians and the administration, the floodgates were open. You know, and it didn't hurt that John Cranley was a West Sider and the mayor,
Right.
right? So when we started to talk in 2014, when we started to talk about renovating Harrison Avenue and the Westwood Town Hall and Madcap and that whole business district, John was all on board, as was Christopher Smitherman and PG Sittenfeld, Chris Seelbach. I mean, they all were, right? Because they knew us and they trusted us by that point, right?
No, and there was so much great information in there. A couple of things that I just made note of, and I wanted to touch on. You mentioned you don't have to wait for somebody to get some blessing to do good work, and so you know already on the show we've had last night. I had Maddie Gerker, a sixth grader in Mount Washington on the other end of the city on the east side, who recognized the problem. She's walking to school and her street doesn't have a sidewalk. And she wrote a letter to the mayor and started going to organizations with the support of her mom. And ultimately, long story short, it led to the city of Cincinnati got a $400,000 grant to install sidewalks on Sussex Avenue in Mount Washington because a sixth grader got engaged on the issue and worked on that. You know, I've had Cam Hardy on the show, and everybody knows Cam now, but a couple of years ago, he was just a guy trying to ride the bus to get to work, and the bus sucked. And he wanted to do something about it because, you know, people were just trying to get to work. And so without, you know, a bunch of money or a name in the community or such, got engaged and really moved the needle and made and is making and has made and will make change in our city. And so I think that's very powerful words, especially in a city like Cincinnati, that you can get engaged. You don't have to necessarily have a family name or be wealthy or whatever it may be. But if you're willing to put in the work and bring people together for positive change, that we can do that here, and we can. So I think that's a very powerful statement. And then also just this notion of, you know, it's not easy. You're going to get some pushback when you put yourself out there. They're going to throw darts at you, some folks. But you know, if it's a righteous cause, you recognize that it is what it is, and you just kind of motor on and ignore that. And I think you all have done that there. And I guess my final point along these lines will be, and then I want to touch on the political a little bit because we know you ran for council before. Who knows? May again in the future. You actually just won an election. You just won an election the other night. We'll talk about that. But you know, just this notion of our neighborhoods and building as you have in the neighborhood business districts and the importance of that. And a lot of it's bringing community together, which is hard to do right now in these times of social distancing. And so we're trying to do this the best we can, even by this program and the folks that are joining us right now. But you've actually created that in Westwood, where you have a Muse Cafe, where we can have coffee and a sandwich, you know, in the morning or the afternoon, and maybe a glass of wine at night, and then we can walk over to Westside Brewing. And you talked about Madcap and, you know, some of these other things that literally did not exist even 5 or 6 years ago.
5 years ago.
And you've created this, and it's building the sense of community where, you know what, I want to live in that neighborhood. I want to buy that remodeled house, and push my baby stroller down to the coffee shop, walk to the neighborhood school, or have beers with the neighbors and the friends in the evening at and we're seeing this across the city of Cincinnati. And I think it's the next phase of growth, really. We kind of focused on the downtown and the urban core, which had suffered for decades. But our neighborhood business districts and the neighborhoods and bringing people together and everything that means. And you've literally created that in Westwood.
Yeah. So I'm going to hold up this picture for you. If you Google Westwood Square, Cincinnati, this picture will pop up. Okay.
Westwood
And
Square, Cincinnati, everybody.
yep. And that picture, when it was published in the Enquirer, generated so much conversation in Westwood. This was back in 2013 that it actually drove development in Westwood. People were seeing something that was new and creative, and there's a story behind that square. So I don't know if you remember when Roxanne Qualls was having all of the form-based code kind of meetings.
Right.
So she picked 5 neighborhoods that really needed that development. Westwood was one of them. Sister Anne Renee McCon, who has since passed, was kind of heading up that, and she's a legend in the development world. And she kind of picked up that mantle with Sarah Sheets and others. And so they took us down to this meeting, and they brought in all of these architects and city planners. And I remember going in with our little team, and I said to one of the guys who was there, who was an architect, I said, "Mark, I have this great idea." I said, "But I need you to ask for something really stupid. Ask for a square. Ask for a roundabout, okay, in this thing. Just go in and ask for it." So we get in there, and we're standing in this meeting, and one of the lead planners says, "Okay, is there anything that you really want?" Mark stands up and says at the top of his lungs, "I want a roundabout," right? And that's all they could think about for the rest of the time we were there. And all I could think of was, oh my God, this is where we're going. I can't even believe it. But it was such a compelling story to tell in the paper that it actually drove the development in Westwood. West Side Brewing saw that picture, and it really kind of motivated them to think, wow, this is a neighborhood that's happening. They're making big changes. They're thinking big. They're going to stay big. God bless them. We want to be part of that. So they moved into the neighborhood. Jack Conley bought one of the big apartment buildings on the corner where Muse Cafe is. He was a guy that kind of had a history in turning around troubled buildings, and he filled every storefront within a year, right? So we got Muse Cafe. Next thing I know, we've had Hanky Winery as one of our staple restaurants and wineries, right? We have an urban winery in Westwood. Right next door, the firehouse is going to go to Nation. I mean, just that one idea and that picture in the paper drove so much excitement in the community and in the surrounding community and to developers that people were like, we got to be part of that. And so I give that credit to Roxanne Qualls for creating that excitement, but I also give credit to John Cranley, Mayor John Cranley, for being able to actually put the money behind it and make it work,
right?
And his connections. So that was great. And one other thing, Westwood did this unique thing. I don't know if you know this. We have the Civic Association, we have the Historical Society, we have the Development Corporation, we have Westwood Works. So we had 4 or 5 community groups, all kind of their fingers going different ways. And one of the things that I think was real genius was a young lady named Mary Jenkins and I sat down and wrote this idea for this thing called the Westwood Coalition, where those entities would come together and form this coalition, a lot like College Hill has done with the Forum, right? Mm-hmm. And so when City Council came, we went before City Council and we'd say, hey, the coalition took this vote, we want to do this thing. It carried a lot of weight, right? And because they knew that they had the community council, the development court, that everybody was behind these ideas and moving it forward. So, that was another bit of power to the asset-based community development corporate, or excuse me, the ABCD stuff that John McKnight and Peter Block have always talked about. It works. I don't know what to say. It works, and we've really worked at it hard as Westwood Works. People just want to think that we're out there to have these fun events, but it really is low-key community organizing, right? How can you say no when you're having fun over a live band and you see all these families out there enjoying themselves on our streets?
And a beer booth. You got to have a beer booth.
And a beer booth. And there are better beer booth pourers than others, let me tell you.
I've been there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a good time because you get to see so many great people, and and you mentioned Kevin Wright. who now is Yard and Company and kind of doing consulting work and such like that. But did a lot of these things in Walnut Hills, where it just started out with really setting out a keg of beer in kind of a
Right.
crossroads area, and we'll call it a festival. And people are like, I don't even really, I've never been there. I don't know where that's at. And then you show up and you start looking around, and it's like, oh, I never noticed that architecture or that building.
Yeah.
Now I know where that's at. And, that's one of the challenges that we've had in Price Hill, I say, where folks, even maybe if they live in over the Rhine or downtown or they're from the east side, I've heard of it. The roads kind of go like this, and there's the literal physical barrier of the hill of Price Hill.
Yeah.
But I see it up there, but I don't exactly know how to get there, and so it's not my beaten path, so I just don't go. So a lot of that, and I appreciate that you mentioned roundabouts, which would lead me into a whole conversation about traffic calming and making our streets safe and just comfortable for people to walk and be out in the neighborhood. But it's also about establishing this strong connectivity so that I know how to get to places. And we see more and more of this today, where we have a desire not to drive and park and drive and park and drive and park, but to have some other way to get there. So, what can we do with bike infrastructure? What can we do, with public transportation and these types of things? And so, not to get on that tangent, but all of this plays a role. But at the end of the day, what is all of it? All of it is connecting people,
Yep.
and bringing people together. And I think that's one of our challenges that we have is, we have the east side and the west side. We've gotten the downtown versus we've got the city versus the suburbs. And we've got a whole other state on the other side of the river. And so, there is this kind of balkanized thing, and at times politically, where it's kind of one side is played against the other side. So one way to overcome that, right, is to just bring people together and creating a strong neighborhood business district, to have that neighborhood coffee shop and that neighborhood restaurants and maybe a micro brewery or something like that, where you just have it brings people together and you have these spontaneous conversations, and who knows what comes out of that. But generally, when people are together, even if they're from different political persuasions, different races, different incomes, whatever it may be, but we're bringing people together, there's all sorts of positive outcomes of that we might not even know. And so with that, as time goes on and we have a few folks tuning in and have tuned in and continue to join us, thank you everybody. One of our new council members stopped by, Betsy Sunderman from Price Hill. Thanks for stopping by. Sam Conover was here from Price Hill Will. My buddy Santino Corleone, who I hope to have on as a guest very soon. Nikki Pearson Mayhew, our friend, was here saying hi. Ron Zupan has made a number of comments. Am I saying his name? Is it
Zupan?
Zupan. Sorry, Ron. Zupan.
That's
I'll
my
call
cousin.
Zoop. Jake Samad stopped by. I don't know if he caught that College Hill reference or not, but Susan Bills, another good West Sider, doing good work in the community and the school. So thank you all. But that leads me. I can't leave without asking this question. John Eby, for so long, you ran for council. I'm pretty sure as a Republican.
I did.
And just on Tuesday, you were now voted into. I don't know. I can't remember if you were opposed or not, but the end result was you're a precinct executive for the Democratic Party in Hamilton County, and so you've changed parties and gotten engaged now. And one of the things I want to preface this by saying this. I think on the city level, this kind of us versus them that we see of the national politics, where we're becoming more divisive. I think it's good to set that aside a bit, because people want someone to answer the phone when they call 911. People want the trash picked up. I don't want cars speeding on my street, and I want my city to achieve some good and big things going forward. And I think a lot of that transcends this party stuff more on the national, even the state level. But having said that, you've essentially switched parties now from Democrat to Republican. Can you give us some insight on that and just where you're at on that? What led to that, do you think?
So in 2005 and 2007, we ran a spirited but unsuccessful campaign for city council, and I did run as a Republican. And the Republican Party was much different in 2005 and 2007, but it was heading um, pretty far right, and I'm not there. So I don't like to think of it as me leaving the Republican Party as much as I do the party leaving me. And honestly, you know, God bless my mother. I always tell the story when I met John Cranley for the first time. Gosh, I'm trying to think of how far back this was. I told him once he was with Tom Lukin. He was introducing himself to people at festivals. Tom Lukin came up, and I knew him right away, right? Because this was my mom's guy.
Right.
So we shook hands, and I said, John, when you reach Tom Lukin's level, I'll shake your hand. I said, I just want you to know my mother has 3 pictures on her wall: Jesus Christ, John Kennedy, and Tom Lukin. And I'm not really sure which one of them is where they're at on this, this thing. But, I've always felt myself as being more of a John Kennedy Democrat than a Ted Kennedy Democrat. I don't know if that makes sense. But, when I saw where it was headed, it was time for a change. I needed some sanity. I definitely wanted my to be part of a party, I guess, that embraced the knowledge and the respect for women, right? Raising 2 daughters in Cincinnati and coming out of a family full of boys, it was a challenge, but a good one,
Right.
And I've grown, and I'm just heading. I'm in a different place right now, as I've matured and moved forward. This is where I need to be, and I like being there, and they've embraced me, and I appreciate that. So, you never know. I worry about the council election that's coming up. We have 6 open seats, and I'm very thankful that you're running, and I'm hopeful that you're going to win, and we're certainly going to support you as much as we can as the EB family, and especially here in Westwood. But we need a council that is going to be focused on making sure that those basic services are delivered, and that neighborhoods are taken care of. And they're going to have some big challenges, Derek. I mean, next year is not going to be a picnic at all. Looking at the shortfall that they're having because of COVID-19 and the stuff that's happened, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, but we need. I'm old school. Let's deliver the basic services and get those done, and make sure that we take care of the people that we can take care of.
No, those very powerful words, and I can tell you, you're not alone in that regard. Folks that have tuned in here for a while, if you're just joining us or haven't followed me, but for the first time, my dad, who we affectionately call Rev Ron, 80 years old, still in Akron, Ohio, preaching as a Baptist ministry, has his own church up there, the Akron Free Will Baptist Church. Now, you got to imagine you're a Free Will Baptist minister. It's a pretty conservative. You would guess most of those folks are pretty conservative. And just the other day, for those that are friends with me on Facebook, they saw my post where I had a long conversation with my dad, and he said, this craziness at the national level, I voted Republican all my life because that's generally where I've been. But it's gotten crazy, and I can't do it anymore. I'm done, and I'm drawing a line in the sand, and I don't care about anything else. But it's just gotten out of hand. And so, I think a lot of folks are, that's where they're at. But again, at the local level, we're concerned about the stuff going on in our neighborhood and in our city, and what can we do, to help all of us, and certainly the most vulnerable among us, to the degree that we can. And there's going to be a lot of challenges. I don't think we have a full grasp of that yet, because really the pain that's coming, that is surely coming.
Oh yeah.
We haven't fully felt yet. There are going to be some very hard decisions to make. I've had PG on the show the other day. I had Chris Seelbach on last week, and I asked them if they could please solve all the problems between now and November 2021. That would be great. But I don't think that's going to realistically happen. But we're going to have some very challenging times ahead. But I think some of the things that you've laid out here, we've had challenging times in the past, right?
Yep,
And
absolutely.
then every time we come out just a little bit farther ahead, and if we have to take a couple of steps back to move 3 or 4 or 5 forward, we do that. But it seems like, and it sounds like from the theme of our conversation tonight, that a big part of that is by coming together, working together, common goals. We're not going to agree on every single issue all the time. That's to be expected. So let's not get personal. Let's not engage in those personal attacks. Let's set maybe some policy differences aside and work on some things that we can tackle together. I mean, does that make sense?
Absolutely. One of the reasons, I go to St. James Episcopal Church here in Westwood, and one of the reasons that,
And by the way, Reverend Mary is with us. She just, I
oh,
don't know if she's still here, but she joined in with a
the
comment a bit
pastor's
ago.
on. I'm in so much trouble now. I got to say good stuff.
Yeah, she noted your bottle of booze that we can, or wine that we can see in the corner of the screen here, strategically
Oh,
placed.
it's so important, Reverend Mary. But one of the reasons I chose St. James, honestly, was, I was, when we first started Westwood Works, the pastor then was Jim Strader, was Reverend Jim Strader. He came to one of our meetings. I thought he was a Catholic priest. And he said, I want you to come and see me preach. And he said, just come on a Sunday. And I said, okay, but if you suck, I'm never coming back. And sure enough, I showed up and he brought it. And what I began to notice was something that was completely different than the Catholic church that I was attending. There were black people, white people, gay people, straight people, old people, young people. It was awesome. It was just a real testament to how Westwood should be all the time. And it's one of the reasons I keep going back there, and why I'm part of their church. And not only that, the Reverend Mary Carson does a great sermon. You got to come see it. It's unbelievable.
Well, with a plug like that, and we've seen you. I mean, and it's a church where you go there, we have a good time. We've seen you in your Hawaiian shirts and different themes and such. But I think that's a key. First of all, Reverend Mary's a fellow originally Northern Ohioan, like
It's from the
myself,
tundra.
and up there somewhere. And so I know she certainly adopted the neighborhood and adopted Cincinnati as well. And so there's so much good work going on. So with that, we're coming up on 52, 53 minutes
Oh,
here.
schmoly.
So
All right.
yeah, time flies when it's the two of
Yeah.
us when the two of us chit chatting. But I think there's some key takeaways here. This talk of community asset based community building, the organizing, coming together, setting apart differences. I mean, you just see these themes overarching all of this, and there's been a great success in Westwood. You've played a huge role in all of that. So I really appreciate you joining us this evening. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for us that we can take away?
So I would say this. You've got this upcoming election, and I think you already know this, but this is something I learned from the campaign trail. Nobody likes you or your stupid ideas. You have to have a thick skin if you're going to run. You got to raise a lot of money, or you got to wear out shoe leather. But after being in 52 neighborhoods in the city, one of the things I will say is that the problems that they're having in Hyde Park and Oakley and what have you are not all that different from the problems that we're having in Westwood and Price Hill. They may not be as intense or as vast, but they're not all that different. They're concerned about crime just like we are. They're concerned about traffic just like we are. They want a walkable neighborhood just like we do. And so what I did learn from that experience, what I would tell you is, do good. You don't need anybody's permission to do that. Just go do it. Go do it, and you'll feel better about it.
I love it. That's awesome stuff. So with those wise words, we will let everybody go. John, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Everybody, please continue to tune in. We're going to have some great guests. If you have any suggestions or if you would like to join me and have something to add to this conversation, would love to have you. Would love to have your suggestions. So follow me at Derek Bauman on Twitter, Instagram, and all of those. And feel free to spread the word on this. We're going to continue to have more great folks from across the city of Cincinnati on. John, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, Derek, I just want to say one last thing.
Yeah.
I said nobody likes you or your stupid ideas. I was referring to me.
Oh, okay. I took that to mean, in the spirit of all of us together, I took that to mean in the collective, that you weren't meaning just me and my dumb ideas. But it's all good, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And everybody, Cincinnati, as always, be well, stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace, Cincinnati. That's right. Take care, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.